In this screencast, I want to introduce you to a couple of marketing concepts that you can use to address learning outcome one. So, the first is the difference between marketing and sales. And marketing really is so general that it's everything to stimulate demand. And then sales is that transaction at the end where that demand is then met by or fulfilled by actually creating the transaction where you get the order. So we've also got, and what you might want to do is find your own definition of marketing. And there are a couple of comparisons when we look at these, or a couple of similarities. The first is this idea, if we can see it here, we've got the word exchange. So exchange seems to be quite key in terms of we offer something and in return someone sacrifices something. So we'll go when we look at the marketing exchange, we'll have you'll see this in more detail. There's another thing which is quite important. It's about the creation of value, and that ties in with learning outcome 4, which is about customer value. So this idea that we create a demand, so we stimulate it, and then we make it really easy to actually fulfill it as well. In just before then, so 8 years previously, we were guessing what people wanted. So the CIMs, the Chartered Institute of Marketing, and their definition has evolved in time. So in 2001, they were saying we were going to look at what the market we thought they were going to do, we were going to identify it, and then we were going to make sure we delivered on it. Whereas move on to 2009, and we're looking at how do we actually create that demand and then make it easy to fulfill it. And then the American Marketing Association takes a broader look in terms of marketing's responsibility to society as a whole. So have a look at marketing and then relate your definition to the company that you're looking at and how they do marketing. So in terms of how marketing's developed, in the production concept era, this was the time where we had Ford who delivered black, black or black when it came to cars. Then we had, after the First World War, we had choice. And then it was the sort of almost like the fairy liquid days where it was very much about trying to stimulate demand and advertising took off. Then after then, we'd got more of a sort of customer focused approach where we were more interested in what people actually wanted. And there was more choice then, but we were more focused on this idea of a marketing concept. And then more recently, we've looked at the idea of co-creation, the idea of actually stimulating a demand based on what customers are asking for. So an example of this, which has been going quite ahead of its time really, was the Walkers example where they have do us a flavour, where you vote for your favourite flavour and then they create the crisps accordingly. And we'll see more and more of this where actually customers are involved. Lego do it where they get people to build things and then they create kits around that. So they're looking at what customers want and then this idea of being totally responsive. And that's why social media is taking an increasingly important role in terms of marketing communications because it's all about dialogue rather than pushing. So the previous three, production, sales and marketing, are more about pushing ideas out with some level of listening, but the relationship is a two-way process. So have a think about your company and where they are on this, because you might think that all organisations are surely relationships based, but I'd argue quite a few are still at the marketing concept stage where they're interested in customer needs, but they're not hugely able, they haven't got the operations to respond in the way that makes them really fluid building around those. So then we've got a concept that I want to introduce you to, the idea of sacrifice. So as a consumer, if I want a luxury good or product, so for example, if there's a particular handbag that I'm after from a luxury brand, I may have to go on a waiting list. So the exchange there not only includes a premium product in terms of what I'm buying, but it involves sacrificing for a period of time. I'm paying the money, it may be in advance. So I've got a waiting time. I then maybe travel to London to collect it. And then but in exchange, I've got this beautiful product, but I've also got a level of self-esteem that comes from owning this luxury item. So have a think about what people give up because sometimes they sacrifice It may even be a level of quality, it might be they pay a premium price for something, but what do they give up that's above and beyond? It may be a level of uncertainty if they've never tried anything before, that they're prepared to try in exchange for. It's like an investment in terms of acquiring whatever your company is selling. There is an argument that if you don't have enough sacrifice, that people won't value what you're doing. So there's an expression, I think it's a 5 cent aspirin never works. So if we've got a headache and we buy something and it's only a couple of pence, we don't expect it to work. Whereas if we buy the premium brand, instantly, as soon as we take it, we're feeling better. So just have a think about this exchange process for your organisation. Another thing that's worth looking at is in terms of loyalty, where we'd put our marketing budget if we had one. So would we spend money on the people who don't use it at all, or those that use our goods or services a little bit, but we want them to use it more? Or would we build it up into those that are loyal ones, or really reward those at the top? And actually, there is an argument that once you start to get people using something frequently, that then this will sort of continue this pyramid upwards. So the non-users or buyers, we don't know if they're not buying it because they're just not interested in the first place. The infrequent users buyers, we've got to make sure they're not just buying on price. If they are, we don't necessarily want them because they're not going to be particularly loyal. But the frequent ones, if we can get them to be at the point where they're more loyal, they'll be brand advocates. So I'd probably spend my marketing budget around here if I was only going to spend it on one group of customers. The brand fanatics, we've got them anyway, so we probably don't need to do too much more to keep them. So in terms of marketing and what it involves in terms of contribution to business, it's about looking outwards and it's about understanding inwards what we've got to offer. So we want to see what the market's going on in the market, because I'm sure somewhere in a back office in the WH Smith there was a conversation maybe 15 years ago about whether the internet would take off, and someone must have said they didn't think so because they should have been Amazon. They had, especially in terms of the book offering, they had the infrastructure there to deliver on that, but they didn't do it. So we've got to make sure that we know what's going to take off in the market, what is it. So, but that's a very difficult to sort of put a punt on where we're going to place our resources and what we're going to market. So it's worth sort of thinking about how marketing gets that intelligence in terms of making those strategic decisions. So we need to have a marketing planning process to understand what to put our efforts and energies into. So here we've got a couple of different plans that I'm going to introduce you to. So the first one is MOST. So MOST, if you go underneath this slide, so when you download them, it will give the actual referencing if you're going to use this in your marketing plan, because it's from a book, the Chartered Institute of Marketing book, but I haven't ever found it elsewhere, so that's why I've put the reference information below. So it starts off with the mission of the organisation. So that would work really well for an organisation that's, for example, a charity. So very much about what they're providing society with. Then it looks at what they want to achieve. So for Oxfam, it might be about raising funds or raising awareness and have certain measures around that. Then they identify which groups to go for. So where we've heard of charities in the past almost contacting people like the elderly or the vulnerable because they've got a list of people that have previously donated. So that would be one of their segments that they target, and then they target different ones. It might be in order to achieve their objectives. And then the marketing mix is known as the 4 or 7 Ps, and that's how they how they deliver to their marketing segments that they've chosen. So MOST is quite nice because it's very straightforward to use. And as I say, it works well if the heart of the organisation is what drives it, so their mission. APIC looks outwards first, so it looks at an analysis of the market, then it creates a plan, then it implements that plan, then it looks at how to measure that. So that's quite a nice cycle as well. So it starts off by looking outwards and then creating a plan inwards and how to deliver on it. And then finally is probably my favourite one, this is, but it is quite comprehensive. So in other words, if you're going to use this one on your um, marketing strategy for your your strategic approach for learning outcome two, it can feel a bit heavy going and a little bit monotonous, or sort of monotonous isn't the right word, but it can feel quite laborious. So we start off by looking at what's going on outside the organisation. So this is where we'd refer to something like Mintel, and we'd look at maybe Statistica as well to see about the market trends. Then we'd look at probably their financial plan to see what their objectives are. Their strategy, this is where we segment, target and position. So this is when we're grouping our customers together. And our tactics are how we're going to achieve that. So through the delivery of a marketing mix which is focused on our ideal customers. Our actions are actually who does it. So do we have an internal marketing team or do we buy in some external expertise? If we're going for a new market or to disrupt the market, we might look at using an advertising agency or marketing agency that brings something special into the organisation if we haven't got experience in doing that in the past. And then the control ties into the objectives. So how can we ensure that we've met these objectives? So how will we measure the sales? How will we measure awareness or social media interaction? So what can we measure that ties in with what they've set out to achieve? And the SOSTAC framework underpins the marketing planning process, which I've put as the marketing plan, along with assessment one that might help you with addressing your first assessment. So this just gives an overview as to the three tools that I've just talked about, or frameworks. The issue with most is that we don't have a control process. So although it's good, it doesn't look afterwards as to whether we've achieved it or not. With situation analysis, I'd say the hardest bit is the action bit, which is looking at who's actually going to do it, because you probably won't be able to find that out. So you might have to make some assumptions or recommendations there. APIC I probably wouldn't choose as a framework for your marketing plan. I think it's a little bit woolly, although it's quite simple to use. So either go for MOST or SOSTAC as the structure for your marketing assignment to look at their activities. Okay, hopefully that's been useful in terms of introducing you to a couple of the key concepts, which is learning outcome one in terms of marketing principles.